Hello everybody, and welcome back for another episode. Today we're going to be talking about the millennial reign of Christ and the second resurrection. So what is the millennial kingdom, and should it be understood literally? Now, in the final book of the Bible, the book of Revelation as it's called, there's a period of time referred to where Jesus Christ returns, and then after, he reigns on earth for 1,000 years, and it's referred to as the millennium. And during that time there's supposed to be peace and unity, and then after that time, before that time, Satan is supposed to be thrown into the pit. After this 1,000 years, Satan is let loose. And here's just a graphic showing some key markers. And why I find this real interesting is because there's an idea that has been put forward. And I first heard about this from a channel called Fendat. And I'll try to leave a link to one of his videos talking about this. But the idea is that this 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth has already happened. And we are actually on the other side of it. Sounds far-fetched, I know, but as we go along, there are some really interesting tie-ins, at least from my perspective. And these are just some markers that when Jesus returns, this is according to what's laid out in the book of Revelation as to what will happen. So when Jesus returns, you're supposed to, of course, Jesus returns, and there's supposed to be this battle of Armageddon, a lot of apocalyptic events, and then Satan is bound for 1,000 years, thrown in a pit. And then you have another interesting thing where they're talking about the first resurrection, and that's going to be interesting when we look into that. And then after the 1,000 years, Satan is let loose to deceive the nations. And then there's another resurrection, and there's this final battle of Gog and Magog, and after that there's a final judgment, and then time no more. So I want to look into some of these things and just see some of the tie-ins to our present situation. It's kind of interesting. So I wanted to start by looking at the return of the King. Now, the first thing I wanted to do is I just want to take a look at 3 instances where there's these references to the return of Jesus, when they expected it. And I think you're going to find the people that were talking in the Bible with reference to the second coming, they were expecting it. It seems like they were expecting it imminently, as opposed to at some point in the distant future. Now, this is the first example, and this is just from First Thessalonians, and this is the King James Bible, and here's the chapter and verse. But this was written by Paul the Apostle, I believe, and it was written to this church in Thessalonica, which I think is present-day Greece. But if you look at the wording, it appears that they were expecting the return of Jesus in their lifetimes. So it just goes on to say, we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven at the final trumpet, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. So he's saying, he's including him, he's writing to this church in Thessalonica, and he's saying, so he's including himself, we which are alive and remain, we who survive the apocalypse and remain to live to see it, we will see the coming of the Lord when he descends from heaven. So that's pretty clear language to me, but that's not the only instance. Matthew 24, King James Bible. Jesus himself, this is when Jesus, he's still alive. The first instance was after Jesus had died. Now this is before his death, And Jesus himself is talking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, and they're asking him, what will be the signs of your return, and also of the end of the world. And he's telling them there will be many false Christs, antichrists, false prophets. The sun will be darkened, and then people will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. But then he goes on to say, Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things are fulfilled. So again, Jesus himself, talking to his own disciples while he's still alive, is telling them their generation shall not pass until all these things happen, including him returning in the clouds. And I think, again, this is when the Apostle Paul talking to this church saying, we who are alive will see the Lord descending from the clouds, descending from heaven. So again, two different people speaking, same event. And just one more. This is a different instance. 1 John 2:18. Little children, it is the last time. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now there are many Antichrists, whereby we know it is the last time. So again, they're speaking that it is the last time, and he's talking about Antichrists here. There will be many Antichrists before the Antichrist. And back here, Jesus was saying at the end, you would see there would arise many false Christs, Antichrists. So 3 just quick examples. There's more I could have put in here, but just, to keep things moving. There's indicators, strong indicators that Jesus was expected back during their lifetimes. And obviously we're on the other side of that. So has this 1,000 years happened? Well, here's where things start to get interesting. This leads us to our second topic, and that is the apocalypse, Armageddon. Now, when Jesus returns for his second coming, it's supposed to be a time of untold destruction, tribulation, followed by a 1,000-year period of peace. So is there anything in our history that we can look to which is a massive destruction event followed by a 1,000-year period of time? I think there is. I think it's just sort of misdescribed to us. So what would that destruction event be? Let's start with that. Well, I think we know it by this name: the fall of the Western Roman Empire. When we think of the fall of the Roman Empire, typically, or the Western Roman Empire, it's described to us as this period of time over roughly 100 years where it starts to fall apart and disintegrate, and it's sort of more of a gradual process. But what if all of this is actually a single event took out the empire that we know of as the Roman Empire? What if that all happened in a very, very condensed period of time when Jesus returned, which is in our past? Because what do we see with the Roman Empire? The ruins all over, pretty much all over where the Roman Empire, what we know as the Roman Empire, spread its wings. We see destruction on a massive scale with it. And we have temples, and even, I believe this is an image or photo of Rome itself. So not only are things destroyed, but they're buried, 10, 20 feet sometimes. And it's not only, this is Rome, but you have it overseas as well. Like you have it in Britannia, in Roman occupied Britain. They find like Roman baths and Roman villas they just like will they'll be digging for something and they'll find a Roman bath. And there's a place called Bath, England, and they found one of these Roman baths in 1878. Now the problem that they had was that there was already buildings on top of it, so they demolished. Let's see what happened. The buildings were purchased by the city authorities and demolished. So, and the cover stories that were given for a lot of the things that are Roman that we find in Britain, typically the story here is that with regards to these Roman baths is that barbarian raids from Northern Europe and Ireland, at the same time, flooding from this river resulting from poor maintenance meant black mud began to cover everything. So why was it all covered? Like, why was it buried? Because they're saying somehow they know that this mud began to cover everything because of poor maintenance and this river. Okay, I mean, there's no way for us to verify. And then they're telling us the temple buildings collapsed and the roofs of the baths eventually crashed into the growing swamp. So what I would suggest is that this is BS, and this is just a cover story, and what you're seeing with this Roman bath is exactly the same event that happened with this, that happened with this, that happened with this. It's all one event, but we're given different stories depending on the location. And again, this is in Britain. They find Roman villas, and now some of the Roman villas in Britain have survived in such good condition. We have a very clear idea about how the rich lived and what their homes were like. But here's another cover story. When the Romans left Britain, and I don't think they left, everything got destroyed. When the Romans left Britain, it appears that some villas were covered with dirt to trap into them the spirits of the Romans. Sounds likely, right? So just stuff like this. So what I'm suggesting here is that all of this happened at once worldwide, and it's just sort of, they've expanded it, made it seem like a gradual fall of the Western Roman Empire. Then they've explained away these villas. People are just intentionally covering it with dirt. Here they're blaming this river for covering the Roman baths in Bath, England, and they've just got different stories, but it's potentially, like, I don't know obviously, but I think it's the same event. Now so this is the destruction event, right? Now, is there a 1,000-year period when Jesus returns? There's this massive destruction event, but it's followed by a 1,000-year period. Well, what happens after the fall of the Western Roman Empire? What do you know? You have a 1,000-year period of time called the Dark Ages. And isn't that just the controller way to do things? Completely potentially invert this 1,000-year reign of Christ by calling it the Dark Ages. And so roughly speaking, the Dark Ages correspond to the Middle Ages. I think most of the history we have here is fake anyway, but I am aware that a lot of the timeline has been manipulated. A lot of years have probably been added, and I know we switched to the Gregorian calendar, I think in the late 1500s, and you also had this phenomena where for a while prior to like 1800, they were putting an I or a J in front of a date, and that I would represent Jesus or Jesus, or the J would represent Jesus. So the date would be like how much time had passed since the death of Jesus. So what I wanted to point out here is this desk it's referred to as the King's Desk. And this desk is in the Palace of Versailles, and it was made, we're told, for King Louis I believe this one was made for King Louis XV in 1769. Now the person who made this desk, he put his inscription in there, and his name was Jean-Henri Reisner. And when you look at the date on this, it's a J, 769. So, but when you look at the official history for this desk, it'll say 1769, but this is supposed to be a J. And if you look at this Jean-Henri Reisner, you look at his birth, date of birth and death, it's again 1734 to 1806. So you go back here, so they're taking this to be a 1. So when I look at this period of time, I understand that from our current year 0 to now 2020 years, there's probably a good chunk of that has been added, but it's still, I think they're probably doing that to cover up this 1,000-year period of time, and a good portion of it has probably been chucked into this period of time we know as the Dark Ages. So, and we also have these mile markers. This is for Boston, and just another example, the I, 734, and here's one I, here's another I, here's another I. So it's after Jesus, after Jesus, clearly an I, not a 1, but we would be told this is 1734. So the calendars are heavily manipulated, but so we have the destruction event worldwide potentially, and we have this 1,000-year period potentially. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is something called fervent heat. So if we go back to the Bible, there are some other verses that talk about what's going to happen when Jesus comes back again for the second coming. Just before this 1,000-year reign, there's this interesting verse that talks about, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. So when he returns, the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Fervent heat, things melting. Where have we seen that? Well, Turkey, right? I think this is Cappadocia, but everything appears to be melted. Here's a good shot. It's just something has happened to the rock, and people felt the need to hide potentially in these structures. And I believe this is from Turkey as well. And I have got one here this is from Petra. And you could just see this area here. Looks like entrances have been covered up, but something happened, and it's curious. The Bible talks about this fervent heat, which is going to cause some significant damage. The elements shall melt with fervent heat. So that's an interesting tie-in. Now, this is where, for me, as crazy as this is going to sound, and it is, and again, we're not proving anything here, but this, for me, answers so many things you have no idea. So we're going to talk about raised incorruptible. So I guess we have a little timeline here, and at the beginning of this 1,000-year, when Jesus returns, another interesting event is said will take place, and it's called the first resurrection. So what is this first resurrection? Well, let's go back to the book of Revelation, King James Bible, chapter 20, verse 6. Blessed and holy is he that has a part in the first resurrection. They're saying the second death will have no power over them. Okay, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him 1,000 years. So there will be people who are resurrected. And just to give you some background, these people are the ones who didn't take the mark of the beast, didn't worship at the altar of Baal, and a lot of them were probably martyred for their beliefs. So they're the first ones who get resurrected. And not only that, they're going to reign on earth for for 1,000 years. So why is that interesting? Well, here's one more verse, just verifying what I just told you. This is a different, this is the first Thessalonians. This was Revelation, but it's talking about the same thing. When the Lord himself descends from heaven, you have the final trumpet, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. So the same group of people. So why is that interesting? Here's why. A different book of the Bible, 1 Corinthians, and you have these two verses. So what this is I can't remember. I think it's the Apostle Paul talking to this. It's a letter to this church in Corinth, and so he's talking to believers, people who believe in Jesus and in the gospel, and he's telling them, "Behold, I'm going to tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet." That last trumpet comes up again and again. So when the last trumpet sounds, the dead shall be raised incorruptible. So that first resurrection, and we, these believers, we shall be changed. So when you start looking into this, these people are in the twinkling of an eye. These people get different bodies. They get these glorified bodies. I guess that's the best way I can describe it. They're going to have different bodies, but they're going to be on earth, ruling with Jesus for 1,000 years. So some of the people who survive the tribulation as well, who are believers, they get different bodies, and these saints who are raised up first, they get different bodies. So why is that interesting to me? Well, here comes the crazy part, but what do we talk about with waste management? The secretly disgusting history of royal palaces. Again, going back to the Palace of Versailles, toilets were only added in the 1700s. That's no toilets for the masses, servants, or even guests. Any toilets. Now, again, I believe Palace of Versailles has 55 fountains. And here's just some of them. Now, water, again, I think when they initially tried to get water to these fountains, they built aqueducts, reservoirs, and they got water from 4 miles away from the River Seine. Now, these people who did all this, they didn't, so the palaces had no easy access to water, and therefore they had no indoor plumbing. The same people who did all this had no plumbing. And meanwhile, the Roman, what we call the Roman civilization, they had solutions for waste management. They took it away, and I know some people are saying, well, they made it to make gunpowder, black powder. Well, here, you know what you can do? You can actually do what the Romans did and centrally collect the waste, and you could still do whatever you needed to do to make gunpowder. So that's not, for me, I think that's BS. I know that that's some of the stories given to us, and this whole thing that it's in the culture, I don't believe it. I don't buy it. It doesn't make sense. I think that some of these people had different body types, and so they didn't need these what we kind of need as far as waste management. But yeah, you had this major step back from this Roman civilization to when sort of the medieval, and even in these palaces. And you know what they had for waste management? Basically, they had chamber pots, and they had like these privies, these centrally located in the palace, where all that it was a toilet seat with a pipe connected to it, and that would empty into a cesspit. That's it. And they wouldn't, like, it would the smell would waft into the palace, and the whole thing with that's part of their culture. it was a problem. Like, it's not like it was something that was any benefit to them. So it doesn't make sense. And even one of the first known toilets that was flushed with water is at the Palace of Knossos on the island of Crete. So they had this thing figured out, but for some reason we take a step back, and here's again, this is just like the Romans had like these communal bathrooms even, and you would just sort of, your waste would be washed away. But they knew at least to do this, but for some reason everything steps back. And what else do you find in the medieval time frame? We have these castles, thousands of these castles. What don't they have? Running water, flowing water, plumbing, none of it. So the most elite castles were the people with the most elite, and some of these palaces, no waste management, no running water. What is going on? Well, I think the answer, as crazy as it sounds, might be people with these glorified bodies. And all they had, the castles for waste management, I think there are these holes on the outskirts of the castle, and their waste would flow into the moats around the castle. I think these were added after the fact, but not great as far as waste management goes. So I just find that fast. I know it's a stretch, but it makes so much sense for me. So now I want to talk about the normies. Turns out that during this 1,000-year period of time, there's going to be some humans, people with normal physiologies like us, who survive the tribulation, but they're not believers at that time. So here's one verse. It'll come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts. That's just a reference to Jesus. So it's saying everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem. So during that battle of Armageddon, I would assume there's going to be some people who aren't believers who survive, and they are in this kingdom, and they're there at the same time with these people. I'm going to assume that the populations are greatly reduced, but you've got people of different types, or different physiologies, I guess. And just one more verse talking about this millennium period. No longer shall there be in it an infant who lives only a few days. So they're mentioning there will be children born. And the one who does not reach the age of 100 will be thought of as cursed. So longer lifespans, but people who are human, who have our physiologies. But so it makes me wonder when I see things like this Abbey Mills pumping station, which is called the Cathedral of Sewage, these industrious Victorians, I'm wondering, is this sort of the lineage of these people with similar physiologies to us? I don't know. This is just inside of this pumping station, but food for thought. Now, I want to talk about the rest of the dead. So here's where we come in. So Satan is, after the 1,000-year reign, Satan is loosed, and there is a second resurrection. And here's where we come in, I think. I think this is where we come in. Here's a verse. Again, we're in the book of Revelation. But the rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. So there's another resurrection that happens. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan's going to be loosed, and he's going to go out and deceive the nations. And there's going to be a final battle with a large amount of people, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. So it's food for thought. Like, how would, after this 1,000-year reign with Jesus himself being on earth and these saints, these people with glorified bodies mixed in with people of normal physiologies, how would Satan be able to deceive the nations? I mean, but maybe those, because we don't see these people with these glorified bodies and Jesus, they're not around. So maybe at the end of this 1,000 years, they're somewhere else. And Satan has been, see, it's sort of a gray area, but here we are, and this is just one more verse before I make my point here. This is just another verse talking about there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and unjust. Now, again, so here we are. We have, starting in like the mid 1850s, we start getting images of cities that have way too many structures, and they seem to be virtually empty. And then all of a sudden, there are found orphans and foundlings and orphans, and it seems like that we didn't build these structures, and it seems like they belong to a different people, but we just sort of showed up. No one really knows where. Most people can't trace their genealogies prior to 1850. I know some can. That might be explained by this previous group. There were some humans living in this millennium. But it's just, I know it's a leap, but you start looking at our current situation, and it does seem like the nations are being deceived. Like, behind everything, every sort of, everything around us is a lie. So you kind of start looking, are the nations being deceived? Seems like it. Did a bunch of people show up that we can't explain, living in cities that appear to be empty that we don't seem to have built? Kind of seems like that. But, because look, as far as how well we know our history, because, you might wonder, well, how could they hide a 1,000-year reign of Christ? How could they do it? Now, I saw this example of a mud flood structure in another video recently, and it's a really good example. So I kind of want to borrow it and just show you guys. This is, and I have a point here. This is Kingston City Hall in Ontario. And I don't know, I can't remember the date for its construction. I think it might have been 1856, but regardless, that's probably not the real date. But what we're going to do is, in the back here, there's this little courtyard, and there's stairs that go down here. There's some stairs that go down here. So we're going to go over to this vantage point, and we're going to look at an old photo of this, and wait till you see this. Okay, here's so here is we're at the back of this city hall, and it's kind of hard to tell, but there's stairs that go down here, and so there's one row of windows, two rows of windows, and there's this third row of windows here, and there you have to kind of go down to see the full amount of them. But now there's an old photo of this city hall from, I think it might be late 1890s or early 1900s, but you can only see one row, two rows of windows in this whole area that has been this is the ground level here, but here it's all been dug out. So under here there's a whole level that you can see now, but turn of the century it was covered. And this is a great before and after example. But so if we don't even know, they've managed to hide what covered this building in layers of earth? Like, when did it happen? How did it happen? Who cleaned up? We don't even know that. So, when we're going back to, I know some people like to go back in our history. We just have to be careful with everything, including the Bible. But if we don't even know what happened here, and whatever happened probably was in the last, let's be generous, say 300 years, and they've managed, somehow we don't know it. So how sure can we be of anything that happened even before 1850? We can't. If they managed to hide this from us, I mean, how much do we trust our history then? We can be fooled with this. What else could they be hiding from us? Pretty much everything. And we've seen pictures of this, and I think this was Kansas City. And like, what else are they telling us? You see these cathedrals, and you have these massive doors with smaller doors. And this is a lodge that's in Azerbaijan. And just look at this structure. When you look into it, it's said that it was designed this way. And it's just a classic mud flood structure. But for some reason, they have these giant doors. And again, it's like a lodge or an inn, and they've got little doors. This is about 6 feet tall, but again, these massive doors with smaller doors. So this isn't even on record as to, it seems like there are people of a larger stature, but it's not on record. So our history, anything's on the table because we don't know our history. And this gentleman, Anatoly Fomenko's got some good ideas. I probably would have, I don't know if like I said, I understand the parasites to be real. So I'm more of a biblical perspective, but he's got some really interesting information as well. So I guess I'll leave it here. I mean, it's been an interesting journey with this. The whole concept of this first and second resurrections and people just showing up. It's really interesting. It's really interesting to me. So I guess I'll leave it here, like I said, but until next time, take care. Bye.
Reserve some for the foundlings.
As it should always be. The foundlings are the future. This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.